Kinship Connects, a podcast from SDA Kinship. We invite you to join us as we share our stories and our journeys. My name is Floyd Punitz, and today it is my great privilege to speak with Dan and Joe, or Joe and Dan. Thank you for sharing and joining with us today. So, guys, how are you all today?
We're good.
Good.
It's early on a Sunday morning.
Yep.
Yeah. I always look to you guys for telling us what the future is going to be for us here in the United States. You know, you can predict our future more or less. It's late Sabbath afternoon here, so yeah, there's a little time difference. So thanks for getting up and waking up and doing this with me. I've been looking forward to it. A lot of guys, or a lot of people, know you guys from the podcast Enough Room. And I love the phrase "back like a boomerang." That's one of my favorite. Along with, I think, KFC was the other thing that you guys talked about a lot.
Yeah.
So you'll have to share a little bit more about that with us as we go on. But let me let you introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about where you're at and where you're located these days.
Yeah, sure. I'm Dan. Live in Sydney, Australia. We're kind of on the northern outskirts of the city. So it's sort of close enough to be near the city, but far enough out that we've got some nice national parks and that sort of thing around us. So, we like living out here with a bit of space.
Is that anywhere near the Blue Mountains?
No,
That's
they're
the other
out
way.
west.
Yes.
Okay. So they're about probably an hour
and a half
drive.
Okay.
So we do get out there a few times a year. So
okay.
And then other than that, we have a cat and a dog.
Yes. Which you might hear something scurrying around, and that's our cat.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've been living in Sydney now for hi, I'm Joe. And I've been living in Sydney now for about 3 years. Whereas Dan has been here for 10?
8 years in Sydney.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay. And if anyone was following you during the pandemic or during that time, we all know the challenges of trying to do weddings and other stuff like that. So,
Yes.
But I'm glad to see you survived the pandemic and came out okay with it.
Yes, absolutely.
So Dan, tell us a little bit about your childhood growing up. Where were you located?
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Western Australia. So sort of the southwestern part of Australia. So kind of like the California of Australia. So grew up there. Have always gone to Adventist churches. My parents were both Adventists. My mother's parents were missionaries out in some of the Pacific Islands out here. My dad's parents were a pastor and his wife. So very much involved in the Adventist church and its mission. So definitely grew up very much engrossed in Adventism, was volunteering at the church. My mum was the head elder at one point, and so just very, very involved in Adventist churches. All of my schooling was through Adventist schools. Lived on campus at the Adventist high school there that I went to, and it was really interesting. I guess leaving. It's probably only been in the last 8 years really since moving to Sydney that I've kind of moved outside of an Adventist bubble, so to speak. So yes,
shock.
very very Adventist upbringing. That's all I can say. Just surrounded by Adventist schools, Adventist conference, Adventist churches.
Does that include Avondale as well?
Yeah, so that was when I left Western Australia and I came over here to the East Coast. Went to Avondale. So again, tertiary education was Adventist as well. And even there was living on campus or just off campus, and again very much an Adventist bubble. I think there's about 6 or 8 churches within probably a 3-mile radius. Don't know how good my conversion is there, but just a lot of Adventists around, a lot of churches. You've got high school, primary school, aged care. A lot of people joke about how at Avondale you can be born there and die there and never leave.
Sadly, that's true.
Yeah, there is a cemetery there, so absolutely. So yeah, until I was 24, I basically just spent my life in and around Adventist education campuses, and very much
felt very comfortable. I bet.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mostly.
Until we get to okay. Well, let me jump over to Joe real quick here and see what his where he grew up and what that was like.
Yeah, and maybe sort of segueing off your Pacific Islander comment, I was born in the Pacific Islands, so specifically Fiji. My mom, her family have been Adventists since the first Adventist missionaries came into the islands, and were very instrumental in the very early days, helping the ministries of taking the Adventist message throughout their part of Fiji. And so because of that, on my mom's side of the family, if I were to mention the surname amongst anyone from Fiji, they'd know it instantly. So growing up, mom being Adventist had a lot of influence. Dad at that point was agnostic. He was like, there's a higher power, but I'm not too sure what it is. He comes from a Hindu background. So that made for an interesting time growing up, just the different conversations around the dinner table, different perspectives and ideas on life. Thankfully, even though mom and dad spoke passionately about what they believed, they never really told us this is what you have to believe in and all of that. And so they, in a way, they left myself and my sister to sort of form our own ideas about God and do that. But all of that being said, we were very much surrounded by mom's side of the family, so Adventism was always around. So my uncles, taught in Adventist schools. I've got pastors in the family, all of that. Mom, during her younger years, went out preaching across the country because that was a phase or thing back then. So I remember growing up, Sabbath afternoons, we had church in the morning, then in the afternoon, mom would grab myself and my sister and then do some Bible studies with us. And so even though I say I grew up in a very mixed family, I also grew up very Adventist in that sense. Didn't go to any Adventist schools though. So I think that's one thing mom and dad didn't want to do, was go down the route of religious schools. So we went to public schools instead, which may or may not have been a good thing, hearing stories from went to public schooling. During high school, I think early on, dad got a job in New Zealand. And then that meant the family then had to move to New Zealand. And so that's where I've been until a couple of years ago when work brought me over to Brisbane, Australia. And while up there, this guy slid into my DMs on Facebook, and now we're married. So
good. Let me take just a step back. Okay, so you grew up by religion, and so did you ever consider taking the Hindu route rather than the Christian or the Adventist route?
No, absolutely. So I did go to, when I was younger, I did go to temples and all of that. I actually know quite a bit about the Hindu religion. And again, because dad's family are Hindus, they're not devout, but because they're Hindus, got to take part in Indian festivals, prayer ceremonies, those sort of things. Also dabbled a bit with Mormonism because I was like, what else is out there?
Sure.
So read through the Book of Mormon, the Pearl of Great Price. So yeah, I sort of went out and tried to see where I fit. But Hinduism was interesting. I think it helped. Someone mentioned, I was reading an article this morning, how Christianity was the language that he grew up in. And while he didn't feel like he now needed to learn a new language, he could expand his vocabulary and take on ideas and words from other languages that maybe helped him express a bit more the ideas and emotions he was feeling. And I feel like Hinduism did that for me, where it helped influence a lot of what I believe today and helped expand my vocabulary when it comes to Christianity and Adventism.
Cool. I see Hinduism as having the blinders are not quite so narrowly focused. They're a little more open to other things in life.
Yeah.
So that's good. Now in Fiji, is Adventism well known?
Adventism would be the third largest Christian denomination in Fiji.
Wow. Okay.
And that's after the Catholic Church and the Methodist Church. Adventism would be the third largest. They, again, after the Catholic Church, have the largest education system in Fiji. They don't have a medical presence, but definitely well known. I think people often initially, and this is back in the day, I think my grandfather's time, Adventists weren't called the Fijian word for Adventist that they're called now, but instead they were called Lotu Savsava, which means the clean church, because they were known for not eating this, not eating that, because it was unclean, blah, blah, blah. So no, they're known as being a bit,
nice.
Out there.
Okay. Interesting how we get connected with certain stereotypes and things that we're known for. So yeah. And I mean, when you went to New Zealand, and I've never been to Fiji, so I can't say, but I love New Zealand and Australia. But when I went to New Zealand, it was like I felt like I was in paradise as a tourist, at least. So were you on the North Island or the South Island?
Yeah, so on the North Island, so we settled in Auckland, South Auckland specifically. I think for us, it was a easy transition from Fiji to New Zealand versus if we had done a transition from Fiji to Australia. New Zealand's a lot more laid back. It's got a very strong emphasis on the indigenous culture. And the islander cultures. So we automatically felt like, it was just a transition. It was not like we were stepping into a new space. We were to relearn everything. And I think the good thing was a lot of the Fijian language, cultural practices, and those sort of things are just very similar, almost the same as the indigenous people in New Zealand or just the New Zealand culture in general. So it was a easy transition for us. We attended a few Adventist churches. Anytime I go anywhere in the world, the first thing I look for is an Adventist church, which is weird, because I just feel like, okay, this is, something that's familiar. So we quickly found a few Adventist churches, and then we settled in Papakura, which is again in South Auckland, settled in a little church there.
Okay, cool. So you alluded to the fact that things were very safe. Both of you, I think, in this Adventist bubble that Dan was in, and Joe talking about Adventism is very familiar. And then at what point did each of you, and I'll let you share, feel that something was different, that it didn't quite fit into the typical boy Adventist culture that other boys were experiencing? Or did that ever come up? Maybe it didn't come up right away.
I think it absolutely came up. I think it sort of had different, for me at least, definitely had different stages. Probably when I was probably late primary school, early high school is when I first started to feel different. And I think because my life was so enriched and surrounded by Adventism, I absolutely saw it in the light of Adventism, being different in the light of Adventism as well, and just not being like the other guys at church. And I mean, there was a few things at that time in the church really pushing, what it means to be a man and wanting to go out camping and just being very independent and rough and this sort of thing. And I really did not fit in with that. And I mean, even having said that, my dad also was in the same boat. He was just going, this is not me. I don't love going out camping, and I'm not what the church is saying is a real man. It's so I still saw, I guess, this figure of someone who I did see as a man, who also felt like the church wasn't necessarily representing him either. So I guess that kind of helped me not to feel too weird.
Good.
But I guess then from there, it was kind of this feeling of I'm a bit different, but it's just because I'm sinful, and I just need to deal with my sin. And this is what it looks like to be a sinful human being, to have these desires and things that are wrong. And I just need to suppress them or deal with them, ask for forgiveness, ask for healing and that sort of thing. I think by the time I got to college, it had kind of shifted a little bit. I think by that time I realized, okay, this is not just a short-term phase. This is, there's actually a name for this. There's a definition for this. It's not just something that I'm experiencing. It's actually something that's a real thing.
Right.
And so I think that's when I really, I guess, started to feel even more different or perhaps feeling like a bit of an outsider in the church. And that if people really knew what I was thinking, then what I was feeling, then they wouldn't allow me to be part of this church, sort of thing. So I'd never really felt like that growing up. But that wasn't until college that I really kind of felt like, okay, I'm realizing now that I'm gay, and that therefore means I can't be part of this church. So that's really when that I guess started.
Were you sharing with your parents or family or anyone else these feelings, or?
I did eventually. It took me a little while to sort of come to terms with it myself, and then and finally feel comfortable sharing it. But ultimately, yes, I did share it with some very, very close friends and family. And that was certainly a bit of a journey. As I said, both my parents very strongly Adventist heritage and very strongly involved in the church and that sort of thing. So obviously and I guess they were also thinking of their families and what it would mean for their families if I was to come out more publicly and if people were to start finding out about me and that sort of thing. So that certainly influenced some of those earlier conversations and reactions and that sort of thing. And it's certainly been a journey. And it was a bit hard at the beginning. I also came out and was very strongly saying I'm gay, but I will never practice. I believe it's wrong. So all I'm doing is acknowledging that this is what my struggle is. This is my cross to bear, and I'll bear it appropriately, sort of thing.
And how did that work out for you?
That kind of helped. Well, yeah, it didn't last too long.
Okay.
So it was about 12 months later or so, I was telling them I was in a relationship, and Mum wasn't too surprised, but I think by that time they were actually, I wouldn't say they were good with it, but they were okay. They didn't cut me off for
They had
anything.
come along on their own journey. Yeah. Good. Joe, did your story look similar, or?
I was just thinking about that. Yeah, maybe. Maybe I'll go into it a bit. So growing up, it's interesting, and you mentioned earlier how Hinduism, where it's not so much, just you haven't got necessarily I've got the blinders on. But it was interesting because in Hinduism and in the island cultures, there is a space for what some might call a third gender, or a third expression of maybe the female or male gender.
Mm-hmm.
And that was definitely true growing up. Usually in Hinduism, and I've just forgotten the word for it, but they have a word for people who might fall into the category of being the third gender. And I can't speak for the Hindu or the Indian experience for someone who might be from the Indian subcontinent, because it is quite different for descendants of those same people who have ended up in the islands. So, and on the Fijian side as well, you had sort of this space for a third expression or a third gender. And I use the word expression because for a lot of islanders, some consider it to be a third gender, some consider it just to be like someone who might be more effeminate. So that's just to clarify why I'm using those words. But one thing that was similar with both sides of, I guess, my upbringing was that even though there was space for that third expression or that third gender, it was always defined as this thing that was separate from the norm, but it was a lonely life, a life that you would always be apart from your family, close, but apart from your family. You would never have a family of your own. You'd never have a stable future, because they were often seen as being unstable. You would have issues with your community because, not everyone was on the same boat. And yeah, it was just not, it wasn't a future that someone would want, because the message was, yes, there's space for them, but that's all that they are. They'll come and dance at your wedding. They'll come and do your hair. They'll come and, be the most creative person in your life, but that is all that they'll ever be. And so that was, it's interesting. So not necessarily driven a lot by religion per se, but more driven by the social sort of ideas and structures. And so that's sort of what I grew up in. And that's what I saw around me, was that whenever I thought about, I knew from the get-go that something was different, whenever we'd have our island dances, I picked up the so some might say the hula. I picked that up even before I had learned the boy part. So
Wow.
like I still got it.
Cool.
And it's interesting from the very beginning. I knew that something was different in terms of my interests, and obviously when puberty hit, it just took it to the next level. But growing up, I guess the message that I kept getting was that if this is, the path that you go down, this is the ultimate end of it. And, I think of not social media, but media like TV in general. Back then, there wasn't really anything that I could see that sort of, I think of the movie Bros that just came out. There was nothing like that growing up. And so you don't really get this idea of what could be. All that you know is what is in front of you. And mom and dad, even though they were open to each other's, I guess, ideologies, and I remember going for a drive with them because they wanted to have a chat with me about some of the things that they had been noticing about me. And they wanted to ask me if I was interested in guys. And when I said yes, they were like, look, if you go down that road, it will only end in loneliness and, you'll get shunned by your community, this and all of these things. And looking back now, it was probably because they were in the same boat as me, where they didn't know anything better. And this was a conversation that we had when I think I was around, what was it? Maybe 13 or 14, so quite early on, they started noticing that, I might be different to the other boys. And at that point, we were still in Fiji, and that was all that they knew themselves, that if I did go down this road, it would be shunned from the family, a life of loneliness. And they were like, when you grow old, there won't be anyone there to look after you, those sort of things. Which was very depressing back then. And I don't think at that age I knew how to process those thoughts and feelings, which obviously caused a lot of issues down the line. But so that's sort of my experience with realizing I was a bit different, obviously with puberty. Started going, okay, that one looks really good. I know I'm supposed to, focus more on that goal, but that one looks really good. And, that sort of just snowballed. Coming into New Zealand was sort of a good thing because when we initially came in, Mum and Dad were in Auckland, but I went down for schooling in Tauranga, which is about a 2-hour drive down. So a bit of separation from the family gave me a bit of time to sort of figure myself out as well. I did come back up to Auckland literally every weekend, but it gave me a bit of space to sort of think a bit more and go out a bit more and talk to, different people a bit more. Because every time I'd be back up in Auckland, I'd be surrounded by my church people, who it was a conservative church that we went to. And so now, instead of it being a societal expectation that I, be straight, et cetera, which was the case in Fiji, now it was more the religious messaging that came across very strongly. That, if you go down this road, hell awaits you, all of those things. So I think in a way, I thank God that in, those few years where I got to live out of Tauranga, I got a bit more space and away, because I can only imagine what would have happened if I was just in the one place all the time. But yeah, that was sort of my early experience with my sexuality. And
Cool. Yeah. So in Fiji, it sounds like because of the variety of cultures and backgrounds, there was a space for someone who was queer, but it was very stereotypical for the roles and the things that they did. I mean, you mentioned, all the other things that person was expected to do, but at the end, there was still loneliness. And so, yeah. And like in the Adventist culture in Fiji, is there that much space there for someone who is queer, or is there still the lesser space just like everywhere else?
There's space for them on the choir, but as
again,
soon as
stereotypical.
There's space for them on the choir. And you go to some of these churches and you see someone who's clearly gay. But as soon as they sort of move away from the choir and try to get involved in other parts of the church, or they are more, I guess, expressive about what their gender or sexuality might be, that's when it just, there's it's a very quick cutoff. Now, the interesting thing, and maybe I'm, let me know if I'm going too much into this, but the interesting thing was there was space for them, like I said, stereotypical in the choir, but anytime anyone sort of leaned into their sexuality or leaned into their gender identity, the church and maybe the community would start creating distance between them and this person.
Mm-hmm.
So you might see them around,
Mm-hmm.
or you might see them here and there, but very quickly over time, they would sort of just disappear from the community, and no one would really talk about them. No one would really say anything about them. The interesting thing with that was that, excuse me, when I came out in New Zealand, the church was very quick to go, we need to get you up the front and, you know, confess that you are homosexual and that your feelings for men. And also, if you don't repent and go through this whole process of going to a psychologist and that we, you know, have found for you, you'll be disfellowshipped straight away. So I guess they were more decisive, maybe. But yeah, it was just interesting, the different approaches.
Yeah. So it was clear that you were welcome, but this is what we expect out of you. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Dan, you, from my memory, dabbled a little bit with converting or trying to convert out, conversion, change, whatever the term of the day is. It changes, and everyone tries to distance themselves and come up with a new name that's more socially acceptable. But are you willing to share a little bit with, you know, why you decided to try that route? And if it, obviously, I don't think it worked, but we'll see what your story is.
Yeah, so that's a good observation there. As I said, I did when I first came out, I kind of said to people, I'm not going to practice. That was my intention. Probably about a year later, I was in a relationship with another Adventist man that I was actually living with at the time. And while in that relationship, I had some people share some books with me. I remember one was called A God Named Desire. I think the other was called Knowing Jesus is Everything. So they had absolutely nothing to do with sexuality. They were just about God, our relationship with God and the character of God, I guess you could say. And so I started reading these books because there was still I still had a lot of guilt, and I still felt like I needed to figure out what was going on. I can't just jump into a relationship and at the same time feel like it's wrong.
So you were in a relationship, you did have feelings for this person, but at the same time you were feeling guilty, and it's like, okay, this isn't what God wants. Okay.
Yeah, I felt like it was absolutely sinful, and I was just giving into my the lust of the flesh, and I wasn't accepting God's direction or whatever. I'm not really sure what I thought, but so I read these books because I also I guess I was keen to just develop my relationship with God. Now, they both had an incredible impact on my relationship with God, and there was a point in particularly in reading one of the books where it talked about the Holy Spirit and the unpardonable sin and that sort of thing. And anyway, I felt really convicted at that time that I needed to change something. But I was really struggling with that because I was living with this guy. We were actually involved in a ministry together. We went to the same uni. We basically did everything together, had the same friends group. And so the idea of breaking from that relationship just, I felt like it would just tear everything apart. So I kind of got to this point where I was really wrestling with, should I go with where I'm being convicted, or should I just stick with the relationship because that's going to be easier? And I love being in a relationship, and this is what I've always wanted. So I was sort of really going through this battle, and we actually were at a camp meeting singing up the front together. And after one of the services, this guy came up to me. I didn't know who he was, but basically, while the sermon was happening, we were sitting behind stage. And in my mind, I'd basically reached this conclusion: I'm just going to stick in this relationship, and I'm going to give up on God. It's too hard to stick with what He expects of me. And this guy basically came up, and I said, didn't know him, and he basically seemed to directly address what I had just been arguing with God about behind stage, and he basically the things he said to me. And the way he said them, I knew without a doubt that it was a message from God, and that God had spoken to him and sent him to speak to me. And I guess that really, that just really touched me. Just the idea that God saw me, and He heard me, and He cared about me. And so from that point, I think I felt this overwhelming, I guess, the overwhelming presence of God and the love of God. And I interpreted everything that was happening as me needing to break off this relationship, which I did either that night or the next day, or, quite soon after that. And from that point, I just felt overwhelmingly like that was where God had led me. And I interpreted all of that as God changing me and releasing me from this sin of being gay. That sort of happened over a few months, and I started studying a lot more about the Holy Spirit, and sort of read a lot of Dennis Smith's books, I think, on sort of the work of the Holy Spirit, and what's it called? Sort of salvation by faith, and this idea of God assisting in overcoming sin even before He returns, and all and that sort of thing. So I that was my mindset, and I interpreted all of that as, when I just sort of let go and surrendered to God, then He took away my homosexuality, got me out of this relationship, and life was great. And about a year, not quite a year later, probably 8 to 10 months later, I was studying video production, and the final assignment was to record a 10-minute clip of something. And so I ended up deciding to record my testimony, and the testimony of 2 other friends who had sort of had, I guess you could say, related experiences where they felt like they were struggling with something. They then just sort of focused on their relationship with God, and it was all dealt with. Now that video ended up, I put it on YouTube, and that video ended up being seen by a lot of people, including some people at Pacific Union College, I think. Is that the one near San Fran?
Yeah,
think,
exactly.
And so I think some people from a ministry over there in the States actually saw it, and they were going to speak at Arise in Australia, and I happened to be going to that first class of Arise in Australia. And
Arise is what kind of organization, or what is Arise?
Arise is, I can't remember what it's, I think it stands for A Resource in Soul Winning Evangelism.
Okay.
I think that's right.
Okay.
So basically, it's a Bible school.
Got it. Okay.
You do door knocking, that sort of thing. And so we actually met because they'd reached out to me on Facebook and said, "Oh, I saw your video. Would love to get in touch sometime." And we basically just said, "Oh, look, if God ever brings us together, then we'll know it's a sign." And so we ended up both being at Arise the following year. And through those conversations, through meeting, I just felt really inspired by what they were doing. They loved my story, and it fit really well with what they were doing. So I ended up joining them in ministry. And I think a few months later, I did a video with Wayne Blakely, and sort of both of us sharing our stories of being converted and that sort of thing. And then from there, I just, through this ministry, kept getting invited to, I think I went to the GYC in Orlando, Florida, did a few Bible, you call weeks of prayer at churches and stuff over in California. Actually went to a rise in the States and spoke there. Went to the Philippines a few times. I think as the years progressed in this ministry, more and more I started to see that what I was saying was no longer what I was experiencing. And at first it was, I honestly believed that I'd changed. I honestly believed that I'd lost my attraction to men. But over the years, I started to sort of see that creeping in again, and I felt more and more like that wasn't because this conversion hadn't happened, but it was because my faith was not strong enough and my relationship with God was not strong enough. And so I kept preaching and I kept telling people, if you just focus on your relationship, you'll be healed. And I honestly believed that, even though I wasn't experiencing it. And I just figured the reason I wasn't experiencing it was because I was not close enough to God. And that ultimately led me to this really dark place, because I just felt so down on myself and so lost in my relationship with God. And I eventually left the ministry. I just said to them I was, just wasn't really interested in continuing with them. In the back of my mind, I knew it was because I kind of wanted to protect them, because I had this feeling that eventually I was going to reach this breaking point, and it wasn't going to be good for me to be, aligned with them. And ultimately, I really did reach this breaking point where I got to the point where I just thought, this just doesn't make sense. Why does my belief in God and my belief of who God is, why is that leading me to this such deep depression, to these suicidal thoughts, and why is it making me hate life? I thought God was meant to bring abundant life and be a God of love and joy and happiness and bring peace and that sort of thing, and I just was experiencing the opposite of that. And that's really when I guess I kind of snapped. I decided that I really needed to study in depth these Clover passages. What was the theology? Because I believed that it was wrong, but I'd never really studied it in depth. I just listened to what people said. And as I was studying, I felt more and more impressed that, this is actually okay. The Bible is not against homosexuality. And I kept telling myself that's just the devil deceiving me, and that's just him getting into my head, because that's what I want to believe. But I just remember there was one particular night where I was just having this huge argument with God, saying, why are you letting me to be deceived? Why are you allowing me to go down this train of thought that it's okay to be gay? And it just kind of suddenly dawned on me, and it suddenly clicked that I was continually fighting God, and I believed that he had won the battle. I believed that he loved me. I believed that he wanted what was best for me. And yet I kept fighting whatever was happening in my life. And I just thought, no, I need to let go and relax and trust that God will lead me to the truth. Stop thinking that he's going to let me be deceived. And just trust that if he wants me to know the truth, then I'll see the truth. And that's when it just, basically a switch just flipped, and I suddenly switched to being affirming. And kind of realized what I'd been doing the last few years, and didn't really know how to make up for that or apologize for that. And I think the more I've been on that journey, the more I've seen just how damaging that thinking is, and as much as anything from firsthand experience.
Sure. As Christians, and Adventists in particular, we're very much parrots. We hear a phrase and we love repeating that phrase without really understanding exactly what it means. It sounds nice. It sounds very Jesus-y a lot of times. But, and so, a question that comes to mind is some of the ministries that are out there to change people say there is no such thing as a sexual orientation. Our orientation needs to be to Jesus. And I have a follow-up question to that one, but what is either one of you, what is your response to that type of logic? And Dan, especially with you having been in that kind of a mindset for a while there, what is your response to that? Is there such a thing as a sexual orientation?
Yeah, I mean, I think there absolutely is. And I absolutely believe it's on a spectrum. I don't think it's sort of you're either straight or gay. I think there's a huge spectrum there. And I think the more that I have studied and looked into all this, the more I realize that just across creation, there is spectrums in everything. And I think in many ways, I guess I would just say that I feel like the idea of sexuality, full stop, in the church is a little concerning. Perhaps just it's almost like there's a denial that it exists, that anyone has sexuality, and sex has become almost purely for the purpose of procreation, and yet it hasn't at the same time. It's just this really strange mindset. And I think because, as you said, we do kind of tend to just parrot things and repeat things. I think people are not really thinking about how they think about sex and what they think about sexuality in general, and realizing the huge contradictions and issues in their thinking, because it's just what's believed in the church and what's taught in the church. And so yeah, I think this idea that there is no sexual orientation it really stems from that lack of awareness of what sexuality is, the gift that it is, that it's a gift from God. It's part of who we are as human beings. I think it's the lack of understanding that is I think what feeds this idea of trying to say that there is no such thing as an orientation.
Right.
And I think that's also what I guess it's that same kind of mindset really that feeds into this idea that there is only two genders that are very clearly defined. It's kind of this lack of understanding what it means to be a person with a personality, with expressions, with interests that may vary. Gender is and gender expression is far less black and white than I think the church wants to believe.
Right.
But
Definitely.
they kind of, I don't know, really struggle to handle that.
Yeah, when it comes to sex, I think we all feel like we're angels and have no genitalia at all, and that kind of a thing. But yeah, so you can have your orientation be a sexual one as well as orientation towards Jesus and wanting to be the compassionate, loving Jesus that he taught us when he was here on earth. Okay. Oh, what about this term redeemed? That's another term I hear. It's like, I'm not gay, I'm redeemed. What does that mean? Either one of you.
That's a very good question. I know one thing that one of the people in this ministry loved to always bring up was this whole concept of how the queer community would say, "I'm born this way," and they'd always say, "Yes, but Jesus says be born again," and kind of thinking just because you've got the same word in the sentence doesn't make them related. Like it's totally different context. And I think a little bit like like what you just said, you can have a sexual orientation, but you can also have an orientation to Jesus. We just had this incredible sermon at our church yesterday, and was really talking about how instead of Jesus and our faith being one compartment of our lives, and then our personal lives, our careers, our finances being separate, that Jesus can be a part of all of that. Yeah. And I think that's what's missing here. That it's almost like they're seeing that orientation, it's almost like they don't realize that you can have more than one orientation. You can have a sexual orientation and be orientated to Jesus, because Jesus can be part of that sexual orientation. Right. You know, in this case, redemption is totally separate to your sexuality. Like, you can be redeemed and have a sexuality at the same time. And I think it almost comes from this fear of sex that we have, like sex is a taboo thing, almost even within marriage. Right. And if there's any sexual desire, then it's wrong. But that's not how God created us. And if you read some of the Bible, you clearly see that that's not really what God intended, for us to have no feelings or attraction or interest in sexuality. And it's okay for him to be a part of that. So I think this idea that either you're gay or you're redeemed stems from that idea that they have to be separate, and you can't be redeemed and gay at the same time. You can't even be redeemed and sexually attracted to someone at the same time. I think, redemption is just totally different context.
A lot of, well, not a lot. I think the whole thing is fear-driven. I think we as human beings love to use your word, compartmentalize everything. And if we can't get it to fit in a particular box, then we will make it fit, or we'll chuck it out, and in society we do it so much. We use words like Arabs to refer to a people who are so diverse in language and culture. Not even going to look at the geographical side of it, but just language, culture, everything, even religion, so diverse, yet we give them one name. Earlier I said the Indian subcontinent, and I specifically said Indian subcontinent rather than Indian, because, and this is my own learning as well, is that when we say Indian, we're grouping a diverse group of people with, like, I think over 100 different languages, cultures, religious practices into this one thing, because it's more easy to digest. And we don't really have to get into all of the different nuances. And I think it's the same thing with faith and a lot of these groups, is that because it doesn't fit into one of those pre-existing boxes that we've got in front of us, we just try to either shove it in, and obviously things break when you try to be forceful with it, or we chuck it out completely. And I think everyone who's listening or watching would agree that has had devastating impact on people around us. And I can only imagine how much that grieves the heart of Jesus. I was listening to a podcast this week. It's called The Bible for Normal People. And I found it really interesting, because they get people from different backgrounds to talk about different ideas and books in the Bible. And the person they got on was talking about the book of Romans and how to approach it. And I, for one, have always found the book of Romans just so difficult to digest, especially certain parts, and it's like, I can't. But the person they brought on was talking about the bigger picture. Why was Paul writing this? Who was he writing it to? Obviously writing it to the Jews in Rome. But he said one of the key messages or key things that comes out when you study the book is that the church is growing, but it's growing mostly above around the Gentiles, or growing amongst the Gentiles, I should say, but not so much with the Jews. And so Paul is writing the letter to try to get the Jews to see that, this movement is just a continuation of the promises and work that God had done in the past, and they shouldn't be afraid of how different this might look, or how different this might be to the trajectory that they had grown up knowing, or the boxes that they had grown up knowing and practicing. And I was thinking about that, and I was like, that's so interesting, because it's so similar to what's happening today, in that there's a lot of fear around they're different expressions of gender, they're different expressions of sexuality, and that scares people because it doesn't fit into these boxes. And I think the message of Paul in Romans is now even more applicable, because yes, it might look a bit different to what we've grown up with. And we might, start using words like redeemed, or if you're not redeemed, and all of these other words. But the fact is that it's still the same God. He's just opening up a different space and a different place and a different understanding, a deeper understanding, and there's beauty in that. And more than anything, we should embrace it. But yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. That fear of the unknown, or what we don't understand, gives the other side an opportunity to create a control over the people who are fearful. And so, I see that from back then, and that's happening today as well. We talk about coming out of the closet, but I think most people shove Jesus into this really tiny closet and shut the door and say, that's all the space you get. They don't open the door and allow God to be who God really is, and so much more than what we allow God to be. No, thanks for sharing that. So at some point I heard Brisbane in there. Is that right? Brisbane?
Yeah. So
So what happened in Brisbane?
So this was after I was actually outed. I didn't come out, I was outed. And messy experience back then. The church tried to send me to a psychologist who they thought was going to turn me straight. He worked for the conference, was extremely alarmed with what the local church was doing, so it got escalated to the conference level. So I did get an apology from the conference, who did try to soothe things out between myself, my parents, and the local church, which was great. But I think by then, the damage had been done. So a
little too late.
A little too late. So my mom and I, we both, for different reasons, we both wrote to the church and asked that our membership be removed, taken off the roll. And so, we did that. I think after about a year or two after that, I felt like I needed a change in environment. And Auckland is great, but I just felt it had become too small, and I needed something different. So I moved to Brisbane. And interestingly, around the same time, a work opportunity came up with a company that I worked for and still am with. That meant that I could move to their Brisbane office. So I moved to Brisbane, was there for about 2 or 3 years. And I think in the second year, I went on a Tinder date with this guy. So I lived my best life when I was up in Brisbane, because again, gave me the opportunity to, find out who I was, and, in more ways than one, because I got to lean into my sexuality and explore that, but also at the same time, lean into what my faith meant for me as a gay man. So that was my Brisbane experience, was, I'd go to the clubs, and that's how I kept in shape. And I'd also go to church on Sabbath morning.
It was the hula dance at the clubs, right?
It was exactly 100%. So, I really lent into a lot of what I felt like I couldn't do before. And it was more just about understanding who I was. And my faith grew. so much, and my understanding of who I was also grew so much. And it was around the same time that I went on this Tinder date, one of many, and connected with this guy. We, from the get-go, we sat down to have dinner. We quickly realized this wasn't going anywhere. But I learned that he was a Christian, and he lived in Sydney, and he was only up in Brisbane for the weekend. So he quickly added me to this Christian LGBT group on Facebook. Right. And because he knew I was Adventist, he quickly tagged all of the Adventists in that particular group.
Oh, there was more than
there was more than just one. Okay. And one of the people that he tagged was Daniel. And so up until this point, my Facebook profile picture, I love telling the story. My Facebook profile picture was me in New Zealand and back home in Auckland. No, not in Auckland, it was further south. Coming out of the water, the sun is shining. I don't have my shirt on. I'm a lot more fit than I am today. And, the sun's just hitting the right places. And that was my profile pic. So obviously, Dan quickly slides into my DMs and goes, hey.
Cool.
I obviously don't reply to him after I give it a few days before I reply to him. But yeah, that's how we initially met, connected. And then it was a series of flights up and down the coast. So I think it's an hour and a half, flight between Sydney and Brisbane. So yeah, we did that quite a bit to start off with. And then I think after about 8 months, again, an opportunity with work came up where I could move to our office here in Sydney, which worked really well because Dan lived in Sydney. So yeah, cool. And now we're here.
Nice. So yeah, it sounds like both of you dated other people in the past. I know that Joe, you said you dated some non-Adventists as well, or
yes.
went out on a date. I don't know about Dan, but with Kinship, I hear all the time, I'm looking for an Adventist husband. And because there's some familiarity there. I mean, you speak the same language, whether it's Veggie Links or Pathfinders or Ingathering or whatever it is, you have that same language there. Yeah. So tell me, is it all that it's cracked out to be or made up to be or whatever, or how is it having an Adventist husband or an Adventist husband with an Adventist background?
Yeah. Growing up in, excuse me, growing up in a family with obviously parents from different religious backgrounds, I had always been weary of finding a partner who wasn't, I guess, of the same faith or background as myself. Because while my childhood was great, I also saw a lot of the conflicts and strong conversations that would come up because mom and dad were from completely different backgrounds. But at the same time, again, living my best life, I had every app that's out there on my phone. So I had been on so many dates, which was great because then you find out what you like. But so I've dated guys who have not been of the same background as myself. And it hadn't worked out. It obviously didn't work out. There was this one particular guy who was a bartender, excuse me, who was a bartender, and we dated for about a year or two. This was back in Auckland. And I think about a year into our relationship, I was like, this is going really well. We seem to understand each other. Up until this point, we didn't have any conversations around faith. And one day we're sitting in front of the TV and something comes up about the Pope attending a conference somewhere, and my boyfriend quickly goes, "Oh, it's going to be about the end of the world now." And so I turned to him and I said, "Why did you say that?" And he's like, "Oh, you know, I believe that the Pope is 666 or whatever." And I'm like, I know we've never talked about it, but tell me more about your background. Like, did you go to church or whatever? And turns out he was actually an ex-Adventist. So
what are the chances? Wow.
What are the chances? Yeah. But I think for Dad and myself, we've definitely enjoyed, I think, the benefits of having the same experiences. You know, when we talk about the Adventist Church, it's very much a cultural thing, and it's the things like our week. So by the time we get to Friday, I think both of us are sort of winding down or getting to that, you know, that Sabbath sort of space. And so we're automatically just going in the same direction. We might not communicate it, we might not say it out loud, but both of us are both heading in that same direction in terms of work. You know, I'm already trying to wrap up my day by the time it gets to 4 or 5 o'clock. The same with Dan. He loves to wrap up his day at like 11, 12 in the morning. So we're both starting to head in. And I think it's those, you know, yeah, we know the same songs. We share the same stories. Dan didn't like Pathfinders. I loved it. You know, you've got all of those different things, but I think it's those little things, like just, you know, being on the same wavelength when it comes to shopping at the supermarket, winding down at the end of the week. So yeah, it's been interesting. It's been good. As everyone knows, the Adventist community is very small, and to be LGBTQ plus inside that is just so much more smaller. And I used to love the idea of ending up with a Adventist. I never wanted to end up with an Australian, but here we are. So I guess it could still work.
God works in mysterious ways.
Yeah. You may not necessarily end up with an Adventist or what you want, but it can still work.
Yeah. Cool. Dan, how about you? Was that the top priority for you?
I would absolutely say it was a top priority for me. I mean, I have in primary school, I dated a few non-Adventists, but I don't think you can really class them as anything. And then my girlfriend at Avondale was a non-Adventist. And I think that there was a lot of issues that arose there. And so I think I saw a lot of the negatives of trying to make that work, aside from obviously her being a woman. That didn't help. So I think then I did sort of try and go on a few dates with people who were Christian, but not necessarily Adventist. I think that was for me, that was really important that at a minimum, they were Adventist preference, minimum Christian preference would be Adventist. But even then, I think I never really clicked with any of them anyway. But I think that was probably one of the first things when I first messaged Joe. I'm pretty sure I said something about, "Oh, hey, you're another Adventist. What's your story? What's your experience been?" Sort of went straight into, what's your testimony? And I think from the beginning that was a huge thing for me. It was just really important because Adventism has just been such a huge part of my life. I couldn't really imagine trying to build a solid relationship with someone who didn't understand that and kind of the importance of that to me as well. And I think there's obviously a lot of differences in terms of, even though Adventism absolutely has a lot of similarities, you know, can probably go anywhere in the world and everyone knows what a haystack is, but you know, there's, and pathfinders and things, but there's obviously also some differences in terms of how you've been raised. You know, what does it mean to keep the Sabbath? You know, what's appropriate music? Is it, you know, have you been to a conservative or a contemporary church, and all those sorts of things? There's still a lot of variety within Adventism, and I think that's been, I guess, interesting, sort of learning a little bit from each other about what have those backgrounds been, what are some traditions, and, you know, we've spoken a little bit about, you know, trying to set up these Friday night traditions in our family, and what can we start doing, and that sort of thing, to really make the Sabbath special for us and meaningful for us. But I think that's just been, it has absolutely been really important for me to have someone who understands that background, and particularly with going to, now that we are going to an Affirming Adventist Church together, I think we have both just found that so enriching, such a blessing. And I think I wouldn't have had the same blessing if I had been going by myself, or had been going with someone who didn't understand and didn't appreciate how special it is to be attending an affirming and thriving Adventist church.
Wow.
And so I think that that's just been really special as well, having someone who not only understands but can really, I guess, appreciate, and we can both, I guess, really acknowledge and speak with each other about how powerful the sermon was, or how you know, how we were touched by what was said, and enjoying the small group afterwards and the discussions that were had there. And again, I think so much of that is because we both have that similar background of Adventism.
Right.
I do want to say that, you know, the relationship can work regardless of what their background is. My parents are still married and together now, although Dad got baptized into the church a few years ago. But apart from that, you know, they've stayed together now since forever. And I've seen relationships work as well, where, you know, someone might be an atheist and all of that. I think for us, we've just enjoyed that it's one less thing that we have to compartmentalize.
Right.
Separate out. We can enjoy that part of it together.
And I think it does. It really depends on the people and the background. You know, so I've basically grown up in an Adventist bubble, and that's all I've known my whole life. But, and so for me, it just makes sense to have you know, an Adventist. At least they understand where I come from, even if they don't like how boring I am. But you know, we've got some really close friends, both of whom are with non-Adventist partners, and obviously we don't know the really inner workings of the relationships, but at the same time, we can see that they just really get along. They really work. And a lot of that is just because of the just their mindset and the way they think. And so there is so much variety in Adventism that some people, even though they are Adventists, will get along just as fine with a non-Adventist because of their mindset. I think I would have struggled because I'm really such a conservative Adventist. It would really mess with my mind. But yeah, I think so in that sense, it absolutely depends on your mindset as well.
So a successful relationship can have the ingredient of having a common faith or belief system, but there's more to a relationship than just built on that. So no, I'm happy that you guys found a local church. Would it be appropriate to call out the church, or you think that would not
absolutely.
be good?
They're not backwards about,
Good.
how affirming they are. So yeah, it's Kellyville Adventist Church, which is kind of the northwest-ish of Sydney. It was about 35-minute drive from where we are. But yeah, absolutely incredible church.
Yeah, they're very, very open, very welcoming. Like, we're not the only LGBTQ.
You're not the token gay guys in the church.
No, not there. And the reason why we started attending this particular church was we have a friend there who went through a breakup with their partner for about 8 years. So he's gay, and his relationship with his partner ended after 8 years. And so we checked in with him. At this stage, we were going to a different Adventist church, just checking in with him, see how it was going. And we asked the question, are you okay? Do you need anything? How are you going? How are you getting along? And the thing that really struck us was he then went, I'm okay. I don't know how I could get through this without my church family. And we knew that he was attending Kellyville, and we were like, oh, wow, that's, something. We didn't say this, but after the call, we sort of spoke about it. We were like, that's very interesting that, he said that. And so we started attending the church pre-COVID, or just before the lockdowns came in place here in Australia. And another thing that literally happened yesterday at church was we have, again, another member of the queer community who attends that church, and I've only seen her there a couple of times prior to this. And so at this church, we've got the main service first, and then we've got our small connect groups or small groups afterwards. And so as we were breaking off to go into our different groups, we saw her. So we started chatting and said, look, if you want to come and join us in our connect group. And she hesitated. And I think around the same time, the head elder walked past. And they quickly started chatting, and it turns out that she's actually joined the small group that has the head elder and had dinner at his house the night before. And now she was more comfortable going to the small group with, I'm not sure if there's any queer people in that particular small group, over the small group that had us and the other queer person. So, and again, it was just one of those things where I was like, I love that, she's found that space where she feels more comfortable there than joining us. So, I absolutely loved it. Yeah.
And I think that was one thing we were talking about yesterday, is just that, the small group we're in is kind of a group of younger, maybe a little bit misfit sort of people, and just a very relaxed. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. No one knows who's leading. It's just to see what happens on the day. But the small group that she's really found a home in is, I guess, they look like your older straight white man sort of group of people that traditionally I would have walked into a church and seen that group and gone, oh yeah, they're conservative and they're going to accept anything.
Right.
But you could just see that she had really connected with them, and she was of the same age group. And so we just sort of thought, it's so nice that it doesn't matter what age you are, you can come along to this church and you can find a group, and everyone is affirming. They understand that if they're at this church, it's because it's affirming, and everybody's welcome. Doesn't matter what you wear, doesn't matter, I think we were chatting with another couple, and they were talking about going cruising, and I think she let slip something about, oh, I joined the Christmas choir and we got free drinks. And then she kind of looked and was like, oh wait, should I have said that? It's a very different and non-judgmental, very diverse Adventist church, and it's it is just such a blessing.
I'm sure they've got their problems, but
every church has their problems.
Sure.
But I feel like they've really found a great way of mixing. They've got an excellent, thriving kids program, but they've absolutely got a lot of the older generation as well. And I think they made a shout out to someone who turned 100 a few weeks ago, and just huge diversity there, and I've really appreciated it. It doesn't matter what age you're talking to, whether they're the head elder, the pastor, just another member. No one has ever given us the impression that there's any issue with us.
Wow.
That's
great.
Also find Alicia's new book, The Bible and LGBTQ Adventist, in their church library. So
great. Wow. I'll need to interview them at some point, maybe, and just find out their journey and how they arrived at being an affirming church, because that's not the norm in the Australian Union or anything like that, right?
No, it's the only one that I'm aware of in Sydney, at least, possibly Australia, that is this openly affirming. We weren't there, but I know that the pastor a few years ago up the front just publicly said there is no issues with gay people being involved in this church. There are no issues with queer people attending. They know very well that, I mean, the guy who is in charge of their singing roster and is up the front 2 or 3 times a month is gay, and they all are aware. And I mean, in talking to the pastor ourselves, he's made it very clear, you know, if we felt like you would be an elder, or if you wanted to preach, if you wanted to do anything at this church, there's absolutely no issues there.
Nice.
And he's not afraid to say that.
Good.
And there are absolutely people in positions of leadership in the church who do attend that church, and it's kind of their home church, and that's really nice to see as well. But I think aside from that, there are other churches in Sydney that would be open or maybe welcoming, probably not quite affirming. And certainly they wouldn't have this atmosphere of anyone you talk to, you know, would be okay. Maybe the pastors are okay, but the members are, you know, a little bit more hesitant.
Not quite there.
And therefore you can't step up on stage and that sort of thing, because you don't want to offend the other members and that sort of thing. So I think
that's really good to hear.
Really good
glad you guys found that church. I was a big fan of the Enough Room and followed the podcast. So I'm very familiar with a lot of the conversations were excellent, spot on there. It's been a while.
It has been a while.
We ended with Alicia Johnston doing several, and her book, and you guys talking about the texts and just all that she was sharing. And excellent book. I'm glad you did a plug for it. I spent last weekend with Alicia. She was here in Dallas, so she's a wonderful person, and just love sharing with her. But tell me a little bit more about Enough Room. Is it going to come back for a new season at some point, or what's back like a boomerang? I'm waiting for that boomerang.
I was just gonna say the whole thing with the boomerang. I've learned I've never thrown one in my life, which is
please change that.
Actually, I blame you. Have you ever thrown one? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Did it come back?
Yeah.
I mean, I have a boomerang, but I'm afraid to throw it because I don't want to have to run after it. When it falls to the ground.
I have no idea. I've been in Australia now a few years. I should probably try to find one. But no, it definitely will come back. And we've been talking more recently about recording again. I think the podcast was great through COVID, but around the same time we were doing those recordings, for me, work just went crazy through the roof. So I've been working a lot longer days, a few changes in my position as well, which meant I had literally no free time. And so we sort of put everything on ice to try to focus on work, I guess. But I think now we've sort of come out of all of that busyness. Not sure about the rest of the world, but Australia only did away with lockdowns and all of that stuff at the beginning of this year. At work, we're only just getting people to come back into the office. So, things have been, I guess, a bit delayed, but it's meant that it's only recently that I've personally come out of the whole COVID contingency, if I should put it that way. So yeah, we've got a bit more time now. I think at the moment we have got, what is it, 60 odd books, or Alicia's books that we have to get shipped around Australia. So, you know, if you're listening and you want a copy, get in touch. But yeah, no, the podcast is definitely coming back. I think I enjoyed the conversations, you know, from different people around the globe. And in saying that, we've got Imago Gay, we've got the Kinship podcast as well. Again, a lot more voices in the mix, which is always great. And I'm really, really happy to see that. But no, Enough Room will definitely be back.
Yeah, good. Because, yeah, you have a lot of fans and a lot of people waiting for that. It definitely serves a purpose and a mission there that is worthwhile. Because I think the more voices that we do have speaking out, the more easily we can be heard, the louder we are. And so, yeah, definitely. Well, absolutely. I've kept you for a while, and I want to say thank you. Do you have any parting words or thoughts for young Adventists who are maybe in college, maybe wherever? Do I come out? Do I not come out? Is it safe? Is it easier to stay in the closet? You know, do you have any advice to give?
Oh, yeah. I'm always afraid of giving advice to this. Yeah.
I think it would be wrong to say that coming out is easy. It's not an easy process, and depending on contexts, you know, everyone's experience is a little different, everyone's family is a little different, and everyone's friends are a little different. But I would absolutely say that for yourself, coming out is worthwhile, and there is a huge community out there to support you, and absolutely Kinship is a wonderful resource and a wonderful community in the Adventist Church, and I think it's a great way to connect with other people, and particularly other Adventists. And then outside of the Adventist queer community, there is again a huge Christian queer community out there, and there will be plenty of allies to support you, and sometimes it may take a bit of looking, but they're absolutely there. And even if you have to reach out to people online, we're certainly more than happy to, and we love chatting with people, hearing their stories, and that sort of thing. And I guess that's the wonder of the internet these days. It's, you know, it's how we met, and we can connect with people on the other side of the globe and do recordings. So I think it can absolutely be a scary time, and most likely there will be some people that will be cut off, that will not understand, and unfortunately that is a sad reality of still living in a community and society that has come a long way, but still has a long way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, my story has involved things like, you know, counseling, which, you know, I still have a psychologist with fortnightly, it should be monthly now, catch-ups. When coming out, there was, you know, a period of time there where I was suicidal. There was times there when I was on antidepressants. So yeah, like Dan was saying, our experience can often, unfortunately, involve some really dark times. But at the same time, we're now sitting here years past all of those events, and yes, we're still dealing with a few things, but things 100% get better. 100% get better. And like Dan was saying, there's such a huge network out there in the world, through Kinship, you know, through other connections out there, where you can have a community And, I think of people in countries like Fiji and in places where maybe being, gay isn't legal yet, those sort of things. But again, through the power of the internet, you can definitely make those connections. But sometimes the biggest or one of the hardest things to get past is maybe some of the messages that we have received and have been planted within us, and it's getting over that. So lots of great resources out there that can help you with that. I think one of the things that helped me was understanding who I was, and that regardless of my sexuality, I was loved so much by God. And the story of the gospel is God's faithfulness to me, and he will continue to be faithful. And in understanding that, no matter what happened, whether it was coming out or being outed, I knew that life would go on and there was always something better around the corner. So yeah, if you're thinking about coming out, or if you're thinking about what the future holds, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, whatever that all looks like, take your time, learn about yourself, understand yourself, have fun with the process. If Adventism is our language, learn another language or bring in some new words from other languages. It'll enrich your experience. And yeah, maybe one day you'll be on a Zoom big interview by enough room or Floyd.
Exactly. So yeah, exactly. No, that's very, very encouraging. Have fun. The sun is going to come out tomorrow. We know that's going to happen. So yeah, exactly. Well, Dan and Joe, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. It's been a privilege for me to interview and talk with you, and hopefully enough room will come out again soon. Definitely looking forward to that. And so wish you a good upcoming week there. Enjoy your Sunday. And I just want to thank everyone who has been listening. Thanks for sharing this time with us today. And we hope that today's podcast was interesting and has given our listeners some things to think about. Seventh-day Adventist Kinship is the only LGBTQIA+ affirming community for current and former Adventists. And we welcome not only the Rainbow Alphabet members, but also the parents, family members who want to learn more about how to support their loved ones, as well as the allies, the supportive allies who stand with us to make a difference in the church and in the world. You can check us out on the web, sdakinship.org. Follow us on social media at SDA Kinship. If you have any questions for me or for Dan and Joe, you can always email me, info@sdakinship.org. And we look forward to having you on an upcoming podcast release. Take care. Know that God loves you unconditionally.